So, we're finally here. We're at that episode, that moment. And we all know what happened in this episode, so I'm not going to pity-patter around the fact. Bakugo is dead, and we're going to talk about how we got to that point right now. Hey guys, how's it going? It is your boy, Manga Drew, and I'm here to do my episode breakdown for My Hero Academia Season 7, Episode 11. And like I said, this episode is the episode where, spoilers, Bakugo dies, or he seemingly dies in this episode. And there's a lot that we need to cover, from the stellar animation to the additions and cuts that the episode actually made from the manga, as well as tackling a sort of inconsistency when it comes to Tomura for one. Yeah, there's a lot that we're going to talk about, so let's get right into the breakdown. And to start off, the episode in question covers approximately 3¼ chapters. It covers the end part of 359, pages 14 to 17, as well as chapters 360, 361, and 362. And the namesake of the episode, Light Fades to Rain, actually derives its name from chapter 362. And to start off, the episode starts off with a recap of what we saw with last episode of Tomura All for One taking out the other heroes and just looking at Bakugo and saying that he's going to more or less keep him alive as he is the closest person to Deku. And unfortunately, we do not get the cutscene that I thought that we were going to get in this episode involving Deku, so most likely we're going to be getting it in the next episode, which is actually going to be coming out in 2 weeks because we're going to be on a break. But we do start off the episode proper with new content as we see Aizawa worried about Bakugo and questioning why Deku is unable to communicate with them at the moment. And how that bleeds into the reunion of the big three of UA with Nejire, Tamaki, and Mirio beginning their assault on Tomura for one. And something interesting is that we get Mirio explaining the situation to Tomura All for One later on in the episode about how he's a messenger, but that messenger line is actually sort of hinted at in the previous episode that I didn't bring up, where you have the people of the support colors talking about how the messenger is going up top, and that messenger is Mirio, who is the messenger because of his ability to move extremely fast and communicate with people. That's why he was considered the messenger. So yes, that is something that I sort of kind of missed from the last episode, but it very much ties into foreshadowing that we get in this episode with Mirio's return. But with the return of Mirio, we also get Tomura for one just taunting Bakugo in a well-animated scene of him picking him up by his feet and destroying his weapons while grabbing him by the throat. And how this is going to eventually lead into some more great animation with Nejire, Tamaki, and later on with Mirio, but this does bring up something that actually ties in later on in the episode, where Bakugo is noticing something with Tomura for one's right side, which is going to be used later on when Bakugo begins to confront Tomura All for One for another time. Not just in this episode, but also in the future episodes, potentially of this season, if not what comes after Season 7. And something interesting about this part of the anime is that in the manga with a similar scene, there is a scene of Bakugo getting crushed by Tomura for one's arms, and that dreamlike sequence is actually cut from the anime, most likely to streamline the entire action sequence as we see it in the anime. And something else that I want to bring up is that also during the scene, you can see the hands on Tomura being animated, but they're drawn in a more 2D style instead of the CG that we've been seeing in the past few episodes. And just speaking more on the CG, in this episode, it seems as if they kind of perfect the CG like monstrous arm forms and how they look extremely well and creepy in this episode, even compared to the previous episodes when we've seen this version of CGI used. But even with that, when we got this pile of CGI hands, we actually get to see Mirio saving Bakugo as Nejire uses an attack that looks amazing. And even more amazing is the conversation that we see between Bakugo and Best Jeanist, where Best Jeanist is trying to comfort Bakugo and trying to like lift him up. But this scene in the anime was done justice from the scene in the manga, where we see that Bakugo, even in this damaged state, is still not giving up and is still having a tactical mind, looking at the fight from the outskirts, because that's the type of person that he is. So once again, the anime is just really lifting up the scenes that we've seen in the manga in a way that I never thought was possible. And speaking of possibilities, we do get the very infamous scene in the manga where Tomura is being talked to by Mirio, and Mirio basically says that what he's doing doesn't make any sense, and that if he had friends, he wouldn't choose the path of destruction. However, something very interesting in this scene is that there is a retort by Tomura All For One, but his voice is slightly different. It's changed. It sounds a little bit more childish. And just to point out, the names that he says in this line about how he does have friends, like Mikun, Tomo, and Mon, are references to his flashback with the 2 kids that he was playing heroes with, as well as his dog named Mon, or Mon. And something interesting that I want to point out along with this outburst is that there is a sort of consistency in the manga that is not really shown in the anime. And that consistency is with the eyes of Tomura All For One. Because in the manga, and what I discussed in the last episode, there is a way to distinguish whether or not All For One, Tomura, or the new entity itself is speaking in the manga, and it's not clearly established in the anime. But we do see that they do take some of that consistency in the manga to indicate who is in control of the body via the pupils of the individual of Tomura All For One's eyes. And that if it doesn't have any pupil at all, that is the definitive truth that All For One is in control. But if you do see a pupil, it is either most likely Tomura themselves, the new individual of Tomura All For One, or even the individual of Shimura Tenko, the childish version of Tomura. And unfortunately, it's not consistent in the anime, but it does show that the anime is still trying to portray that there are differences between All For One and Tomura who are residing in the same body. And how they bring up that the merger was not necessarily complete and that there is still a fragment of Shimura inside of them. But going from that outburst, we do have the Tomura All For One, or All For One himself, ignoring Mirio as he's trying to approach Bakugo to pretty much attempt to kill him. As we get a flashback to the plan of the Big Three that relies on Tamaki to potentially finish off Tomura, as we get both Mirio, Nejire, and Best Jeanist trying their best to stop Tomura All For One from approaching Bakugo. And what's very interesting about this moment is that in the manga, this is where we get Nejire's flashback or backstory. But in the anime, they add upon it in a very great way, where we really get to see how Nejire felt ostracized by her fellow classmates in middle school, and how we actually get to see that in the anime versus that just being told in the manga. As well as we get to see a better understanding of how the friendship between Nejire, Tamaki, and Mirio formed, even if it's just a little bit. So the anime is really adding to Nejire's character, really fleshing her out because she was the weakest character when it comes to development when it came to the Big Three. So I'm glad that they added this scene because it adds a little bit more depth to Nejire as a character. And speaking of depth, we do get a little bit more flashbacks from Mirio and Tamaki's perspective to build up on what we're going to be seeing with Tamaki with his final attack against Tomura All For One, where we see some very cool action of Nejire hammering in her energy into Tomura and it doing very little damage, as we get a recontextualization of a scene in the manga explained and elaborated more in the anime. Where in the manga, the implication is that when Tamaki is using the time that Nejire is buying him to create his ultimate chimera cannon, or his vast hybrid plasma cannon, we see that Nejire is actually shooting her waves into the cannon, and not the implication that you may have thought in the manga, which is that Tamaki was eating Nejire's energy. But either way, the scene itself of him blasting the laser and even Mirio coming in the laser to punch Tomura to keep him in place was all animated fantastically. However, it was not enough to even damage or put him down, as we see the waves of attacks coming in, knocking the heroes down, but as they are all knocked down, Bakugo is able to stand back up. And what is very cool about this scene is how it's animated extremely well, even to a point of it being slightly cinematic at times. And that fight sequence itself was amazing. You're able to see how powerful Bakugo's cluster is, but more importantly, we're able to see how cluster itself is able to amplify his speed to the point where he's able to dodge an attack from Tomura All For One, who has the equivalent speed of an All Might at his prime, which amazes all of the heroes around him and puts a little bit of fear inside of Tomura All For One. But unfortunately, that fear does not last long, because even with the speed that Bakugo has, Tomura All For One is still stronger and faster. And this is where we get the namesake of the chapter, Light Fades to Rain. Because as we see all of the heroes trying their best to save Bakugo, Bakugo has this sort of introspective moment with All Might in his vestige form, which is most likely in the chapter to really hammer in the canonicity of the second movie where Bakugo got one for all from Deku, which may be the explanation for why he's able to see the vestige of All For One, which is what this is implying, that Bakugo is about to die. And we do see with the final attack of even the heroes coming in to help, we see that Bakugo's heart is heavily damaged. And as we see Best Jeanist noticing Bakugo hit the ground and trying to help, we see an All Might card that Bakugo wanted All Might to sign hit the ground, as we have Bakugo's parents questioning and understanding that the dark clouds, the weather is changing. The dark clouds are coming in and it's about to rain. And as Bakugo very much dislikes the rain, the atmosphere itself is building to the idea that Bakugo, after this attack, is dead, and that the dark skies are an indication of his death, as we have Tomura All For One indicate that it is their story, our story to tell, as the episode ends. Yeah, Bakugo, at least based off this episode, is most likely dead. And the question that we're all going to have is whether or not he's going to stay dead. And I will say this, I will let that be a non-spoiler for all of my anime onlys. But yeah, this was an amazing episode. This was a highlight of the season. Not only was it an emotional ride, but there was a fair amount of additions that really adds to the characters who are fighting in this war. And also, it was just well animated and well adapted from the source material. But yeah, this is pretty much my breakdown and review of this episode of My Hero Academia. And let me ask you this, what'd you think of the episode? Did you like it? Did you dislike it? And do you think that Bakugo is actually dead? Leave your thoughts down below, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel for more content like this. Do all that cool jazz, and hopefully I'll be able to catch you in my next video. Goodbye!